£1 million. That is what a consistent investment of £500 a month over 40 years inside a stocks and shares ISA could make you. And the best part, you wouldn't pay a single penny of tax on it. No trading screens, no financial degree, no hours glued to the markets every day. Just a phone, a strategy, and some time. Sounds too good to be true, right? I promise you it isn't. Yo, what is going on, guys? Maddie Max here and welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about the stocks and shares ISA, what it is, why it's honestly one of the best wealth building tools available to anyone living in the UK right now, the downsides you need to know about, and exactly how to get started, even if you've never invested a single penny in your life. So, if you've ever wondered how ordinary people build serious wealth without winning the lottery or landing some crazy high paying job, just stick around because this video is just for you. Let's get into it. Before I get into it, I have to put the following disclaimer. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. So first of all, what is a stocks and shares ISA? Well, this was introduced back in 1999 by the UK government at the time, and the aim was to encourage more people to invest and save. Now, please note there are multiple different ISAs, but the one I'm going to be talking about in this video is going to be the stocks and shares ISA. A stocks and shares ISA allows you to invest in a wide range of assets. This could be shares in individual companies, including the likes of Apple and Nvidia, the latter which has seen incredible growth over the past few years. Or alternatively, you could put your money into funds such as ETFs, which is the strategy that I personally employ. The reason I'm talking about the stocks and shares ISA in this video is because it has so many benefits. The main one being compound growth. So what is compound growth? Well, here's the basic idea. You invest your money, it grows, and then that growth starts earning its own growth. It snowballs. And inside the stocks and shares ISA, because there's zero tax dragging it back, that snowball rose fast. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to be using an assumed annual return of 7%. The S&P 500 has historically averaged around 10% per year since inception, but I've knocked off 3% to give you an account for inflation so that we're working in real terms. What that means is the figures I'm showing you, or I'm going to show you anyway, reflect true purchasing power and not just a number that looks big on paper. I'd rather give you the more prudent figure so at least you know what you're working with. Let me throw some numbers at you to make this real. Let's say you invested £1,000 initially, today, and then you proceeded to put in, say, £500 a month for the next 30 years. This would mean in 30 years your balance will turn into £574,000. What does that mean? Well, it means if you do the numbers, you only put in £181,000 worth of contributions over 30 years, but in return you got an additional £393,000. That gets you to the total £574,000. Effectively, you've earned more than double what you put in, which is crazy, right? But here is where it's even crazier. Let's assume you invested 5 more years. You would now have 840k. If you then invested an additional 5 years to take it up to 40, you would have 1.2 million. The numbers seem crazy, but actually, this is the magic of compound growth. The secret ingredient though, and I can't stress this enough, is time. The earlier you start, the more time you give your money to grow. As you saw in the earlier example, simply by starting 5 years earlier, you would have gone from a balance of 574k to then 840k, and then you did another 5 years and then you would have 1.2 million. It's insane if you think about it, because investing an additional 5 years, taking you from 30 years to 40 years, you gain an additional 600k. This is the beauty of compound growth, and it's why you must start early. Tax-free gains. This is the next benefit. So outside of an ISA, if your investments grow you would sell them for a profit, HMRC wants a cut. However, inside the stocks and shares ISA, HMRC gets absolutely nothing, meaning your gains are yours, any dividends you make are yours, end of story. But here is where it links back to what we were just talking about with compound growth. Every single time tax takes a bite out of your returns outside of an ISA, it's not just reducing your gains today, it's also reducing the pot that compounds tomorrow. You're not just losing that tax payment once, you're losing every single amount of money that would have grown into over the next 10, 20 or 30 years. So, if you had two investors, both starting off with 1k initially and putting in £500 a month for the next 30 years with a 7% annual return, like the example we used above, one is inside the stocks and shares ISA and the other one is outside paying tax on the gains. The ISA investor ends up with roughly 574k, the non-ISA investor around 439k. The same contributions, the same time period, the same market, but a difference of 135,000 just from the tax wrapper. Now, 135k, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, it's not a small number. Flexibility. That is another key benefit of the stocks and shares ISA, which separates it from other investment tools such as pensions. Let's talk about pensions for a second. Pensions, obviously, they're brilliant, don't get me wrong, and I might do a whole separate video on those. The one thing that makes people nervous about putting your money into a pension is that effectively it's locked away until you're 55. You have zero access to it before then, and life happens, right? Circumstances change, and the idea of your money being completely untouchable for decades puts a lot of people off. With the stocks and shares ISA, there's none of that. Your money is yours, you can access it whenever you want. There's no age restrictions, no penalties, no awkward conversations with HMRC. If something comes up, whether it's a business opportunity, whether it's an emergency, maybe your car's broken down and you need to fix it, you can always do that. You can always dip into your stocks and shares ISA. You can sell some shares, some ETFs, and you can withdraw that money back into your main bank account, ready to pay for that emergency. Now, I'm not saying you should be dipping in constantly, because if you remember what I said earlier, every single time we chop off a bit of the snowball, the compound growth slows down. But the point is that you can. And having that safety net in the first place actually makes people feel a lot more comfortable committing to investing in the first place. Now, with the stocks and shares ISA, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You do have some downsides, which I'm going to talk about now. The first one being the annual allowance cap. So every tax year in the UK, you can only put a maximum of 20 grand into your ISAs. That's across all ISAs combined, not 20 grand each. Meaning, let's say you've put 10 grand already into a cash ISA. That means you've only got 10 grand left to put in your stocks and shares ISA. For most people watching this, 20 grand a year is probably a number which is never going to be reached. 20 grand a year equates to effectively 1.6 grand a month, which is a serious amount of money actually. And for the majority of everyday investors, that cap is never going to be reached. So yes, the cap is a limitation, and it's why I've put it as a downside, but actually a lot of people are probably not going to be investing 20 grand a year into the ISA. The next downside, which is the one that puts people off investing altogether, is market risk. And I completely get it, because when you've worked hard for your money, the last thing you want to do is hear from people that you could lose it. So let's talk about market risk, because a lot of people misunderstand what it actually means. The simple reality is that unlike a cash ISA where your money just sits there earning interest, a stocks and shares ISA is invested in the market, and the market goes up and down, and that's just what it does, which means, yeah, the value of your ISA can fall, and you could log in one day and see that your pot's worth less than what it was yesterday. However, we've seen that even during financial crises. So for example, the 2008 financial crisis, or during the COVID crash in 2020, actually the market drops. But this is what separates investors who build real wealth from those who don't. These drops are always temporary. Every single time in history that the market has crashed, it's always recovered. And not just recovered, it's gone on to hit all-time highs. For example, if you look at the price of the S&P 500 right now, you'll see that it's higher than it was during COVID, and it's higher than it was during the 2009 financial crisis. The way I like to think of these market crashes, I like to think of them as discounts. The risk isn't about the market falling, because at some point it does fall. That's basically guaranteed. But the real risk is panicking when it does and selling your investments at the bottom. That's how people actually lose money in the long run. If you bought just before COVID and you saw that the price had dropped, if you had sold once the price dropped, you would have lost out. But if you had kept your shares, you'd see massive gains right now. So the risk really isn't about the market falling, because it will fall at some point. But the real risk is panicking when it does and then selling your investments at the bottom. That's how people actually lose money in the long run. So yeah, market risk is real, and you should go in with your eyes open. But for long-term investors who stay calm and stay invested in the market, history suggests that the risk is very manageable. And the biggest risk actually, in fact, is the risk of not investing at all, because effectively at that point your money's not growing and inflation is eroding the value of your cash savings year after year. The only way to beat inflation is to invest. So I've talked about the benefits, I've talked about the downsides, but how do you actually get started? The first thing you do is you need to choose a platform. This is basically the app or the website that holds your ISA and lets you buy and sell investments. There are loads of options out there, and each one has slightly different fee structures, investment options, etc. But don't let choosing a platform become the thing that stops you from starting. The one I personally use is called Trading 212. Now don't worry, this isn't an ad, they're not paying me. The reason I'm telling you is because getting started, choosing a platform is sometimes quite complicated. There's so many options, different fees, different investment options, interfaces, etc. Trading 212 genuinely has a quite easy to use user interface. So that's what I'd recommend if you're struggling to figure out which platform to use. Then the next part is about, well, once you've got the platform downloaded, what you actually invest in. If you're brand new to this, my suggestion would be to keep it simple. An index fund like the S&P 500 ETF is honestly a good place to start. Essentially, by investing in the S&P 500, you're buying investments into the companies that sit inside the S&P 500, such as Amazon, such as Nvidia. So rather than betting on one company to do well, you're betting on the entirety of these companies inside of the S&P 500 to keep growing as a whole, which historically they've always done. The great thing about investing is that you don't actually need a lot to get started. In my early example that I used, where I talked about how an individual could start with £1,000 a month and invest £500 a month for 30 years. Now, that was just an example. You could actually go lower. You could maybe start with £50, you could start with £100. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is time. So, the main thing is to get started early. The absolute worst thing you can do is sitting on the sidelines and waiting for the perfect moment to invest, because ultimately there is no perfect moment. The perfect moment would probably be yesterday, but we can't go back in time. So actually the best time to start is now, because every single minute, every single hour, every single day, every single week, every single month that you're not compounding, you're not growing, you're not building that snowball we talked about, the lower your future balance is going to be. So here's what I'd say. Pick a platform today, open the ISA this week, start with whatever amount feels comfortable, even if it's small. It could be £50, it could be £100. Choose a simple index fund. The one I mentioned above was the S&P 500. I would suggest that if you're unsure about what to get started in. And when you invest, don't look at it every single day. Just leave it alone and let time do its thing. I'm going to end the video here. Thank you for staying right till the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer any question that pops up. If you did enjoy the video, please do leave a like. If not, feel free to dislike. Take care and have a good rest of your day.